Good afternoon, and thanks everyone for joining. We'll give it a minute for people to join our meeting. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining today. For many of you, I'm probably a new face. My name is Saskia Korczyk, and I'm the CEO of the Telco Together Foundation. Before we begin today, I would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional custodians of the land from which I'm joining you today. And I want to pay my respects to elders past and present. I often think of the depth of connection that First Nations people have with country. And this is especially when I walk along the Mordialloc Creek, or the Mordialloc Creek as it was called. And this is the southern border of the Wurundjeri people's traditional territory. And to me, I always feel it's so remarkable that for tens of thousands of years, this place has carried culture, identity, and connection. I also want to acknowledge and welcome any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are joining us today. And it is a real privilege to live, work, and walk on this country. Now, on to today's session. As you probably have noticed, this session is being recorded, and we will distribute a recording for anybody who is not able to attend today. The increasing use and reach of technology, while immensely beneficial, also brings forth complex social challenges. And these often disproportionately affect vulnerable people. The landscape of these social challenges linked to telecommunication is dynamic and often changing, and it's presenting new complexities. This varies from modern slavery to climate change, from DFSV to tech abuse and digital inclusion. And no single organization can effectively tackle these pervasive issues alone. But it should also be noted that telcos often play a key role in bringing solutions to these very complex problems. Founded in 2011, the Telco Together Foundation facilitates a collective industry approach, transforming individual corporate efforts into a powerful and coordinated force for good. We work with our members to drive best practice at the intersection of social impact and industry challenges. And as you can see on the next slide, for many years, we've been working alongside our members in the industry to help improve how telcos respond to those impacted by domestic, family, and sexual violence. And it's something that we're deeply committed to, and we're pleased to see many of our members joining us today. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to go over all of the individual boxes that you can see on this slide here, but hopefully it can give you a sense of the type of work that TTF has been working on over the past 5 years together with our members. One of the main things that I do want to highlight is the DFA action framework. We developed this framework by drawing together industry guidance that existed at the time from organizations such as ATA, TIO, ACMA, but also in close consultation with DFE frontline services. And it is really a practical pathway that helps telcos understand how they can make a meaningful difference in this space at a level that aligns with their size, their maturity, as well as their organizational priorities. And it's been wonderful to see that those who worked on the action plan early on were really well set up for the incoming, now mandatory standard. With the introduction of the DSV standard on July 1st, the DFV action framework is now being updated to incorporate all of the requirements, the policies, the practices, and the procedures. And we're pleased to share this work with you very shortly. Now, it should be noted, the standard is the mandatory regulatory requirement. But we are committed to continue working with our members to drive industry best practice efficiently and effectively, and focusing on outcomes and input. The goal of the session today is to make sure that everybody, whether you're small or big, who's impacted by the standard, either already or next year, will walk away with an understanding of what your obligations are with regards to training employees and frontline staff, why it matters, and really to get a good understanding of how to get started. And we're really pleased today to be joined by 3 excellent speakers, and I really want to thank them for taking the time to be here. We've got Bev Preston, who's Capability, Design and Delivery Manager at DPG Telecom, Mia Ristovska, Quality and Training Manager at DV Connect, and Haley Williamson, Lived Experience Manager at Safe and Equal. And for anybody, if you haven't read their bios yet, they're very impressive. They were on the registration page, but you can also find them in the chat today. The session today will focus on a 20-minute panel whereby Bev will outline his journey over the past year and before that already, and then we'll move into a panel format. If you have any questions, please feel free to raise them in the Q&A because we want this session to be a benefit to you. So the most important thing is that your question gets answered rather than mine. Before we invite Bev to give his presentation, I wanted to ask everybody a quick question and see where you are on your journey in your organization. So I'm going to bring up a poll. Hopefully. And the question is, where is your organization currently at with implementing the DFV training? Are you already doing this? Are you currently reviewing it? Are you planning to start, but not yet on the way? Haven't started, or you're not sure and it's not really applicable to your role? So let's see what the results are coming in there. That's quite positive to note. What I can see so far, 37% has already implemented fully or partly some form of training. But we also see that there's about 20% still starting and 30% currently reviewing and doing a gap analysis. So hopefully we can provide some answers to all of you in this group and see how we can help you further progress along this journey. And with that, I would like to hand over to Bev to talk about his journey at DPG Telecom when it comes to implementing the DFV training requirements. Thanks, Bev, for joining us.
Thank you, Saskia, for the invite. I am just going to share my screen now. And I've just put together a few slides to talk a little bit about our journey and my journey into this topic with a focus on learning and development. So again, thanks for the opportunity to come along and share some thoughts and insights and some stories about how TPG Telecom is working with training, policy, process, systems to support victim survivors of domestic, family and sexual violence. So first, just a brief bit about me. My name's Bevan. I've been working in a Hutchison business for a little more than 20 years, although that business has been something a bit different over that time. I started at 3 Mobile, which merged with Vodafone, which then merged with TPG Telecom, so I've been along for that ride. I've pretty much always had a learning and development background. I started as a trainer, facilitator. I defected into the dark arts of e-learning design And now I lead the two teams at TPG Telecom. I have a team of facilitators and I have a team of e-learning developers. And my remit is really the execution of learning across our business. And that's across our corporate employees, our frontline stores, our frontline contact centers, whether that's onshore or overseas. And that's quite a large audience. We have probably about 15 to 16,000 people scattered across a number of countries and lots of different roles, both directly employed and partnering with TPG Telecom. So I'm going to, like a good trainer, like a good facilitator, I can't help but be a storyteller. And I thought the best way I could present to you what we're doing is to take you on a bit of a journey about my involvement and link that to what we're doing at TPG Telecom. So I came into this in March of this year when my leader offered me the opportunity to get involved here. And at this stage, the standard was still in draft. And we had just started to spin up a working group of different people from around the country. We had regulatory in there. We had our new head of customer wellbeing. We had myself and a few others. And we began to talk a little bit about the ratification of the standard and what that meant for us as a company. So we knew that the standard was going to come in or around July. And what happened sort of between March and July often happens when we have this new renewed focus on this aspect of customer service. And that is suddenly everything was on fire. You put a big enough magnifying glass on a topic and suddenly you're spotting gaps and problems everywhere. And so my first kind of introduction to this was the standard is bringing this kind of renewed or this new focus on domestic, family and sexual violence. And everywhere we were looking, we were spotting areas of improvement. I'm a bit of a slow, thoughtful kind of person, and I kind of try to resist the temptation of getting caught up in the rush of trying to solve business problems. But it sort of became apparent that there were kind of a couple of concurrent things happening. The first was the movement towards the standard. And the second thing was we immediately identified, just through taking a look, areas of improvement. And so getting to today, we've done a number of things at TPG Telecom, but a lot of it has initially been simply looking to fix some of the more hygienic aspects of it. So our policies, our processes, our systems, and a little bit of learning and development to help people do a better job in the interim while we work towards the development of a more comprehensive learning and development plan and get everybody trained by the 1st of April, which is kind of our target with the standard. So one of the first things I wanted to do was to try and corral all the cats running in different directions, trying to solve all these different business problems by just trying to understand what are the problems. Like everybody says that, we've got all these little gaps and we need to fix this and we need to do that. And I wanted to sort of get everyone to kind of stop and pause for a moment and say, let's actually take a bit of a closer look and identify what are the gaps in the short term. So what I was able to do, and it's always a rare treat to be able to do this rather than just sort of rushing out and sort of playing whack-a-mole with training solutions, is we did a bit of a training needs analysis and we sort of developed a 7-scenario quiz that we gave to all our frontline teams. And we developed this scenario-based quiz in conjunction with our team in Hobart and a few of our SMEs who work in this space. They work in assisting customers in crisis. So they were able to give me really realistic scenarios of different kinds of customers who come to us in different scenarios of being a victim survivor of domestic and family violence. And then I was able to work with them to establish, what's the correct way of managing these scenarios in a given situation. And then what are the common mistakes people are making? And through the TNA, we gave them a series of scenarios and a series of responses to pick from. And by looking at the way in which our team were responding to each one of these scenarios, we were able to get a really clear picture of, okay, in the short term, while we're working towards the standard, there's some really simple things we can do to address some of the knowledge gaps, maybe some of the process gaps, and to give our teams just a little bit more confidence in working with customers who are experiencing domestic family sexual violence. The other thing that was already in development, which was a little bit of serendipity, was that we were already working on a brand new e-learn on the revised TCP code. And I kind of saw this as a great opportunity to kind of Trojan horse in some other topics, because this e-learn was going to be really broad. It was going out again to all our frontline teams. And not only did it touch on all the different aspects of TCP and also the financial hardship standard, but I also got the designer who was building this with me to add a section on DFSV. And the reason why I did this is because I was also aware of the Telco Together DFSV framework. And the great thing about the framework was that it just simply categorized learning into three segments. E1, which was sort of the all company awareness, E2, which was sort of more detail for frontline, and E3, which was about training for specialist teams who work in this space. And so I saw this as a really neat opportunity to get ahead of the game and to do an E1 level. And so we ended up adding a section on DFSV to our TCP e-learn, and this is now sort of rolled out all the way across our front line, and we're preparing to roll this out across all our corporate employees as well. So it will begin the journey of creating a much stronger awareness of the issues and experiences of customers experiencing DFSV. And so these two activities are sort of what we've managed to achieve so far. But we also are working towards the 1st of April, which is the timeline we have to have everybody trained in order to meet the standard, which is a completely different thing. However, there's a couple of other things happening here. Coming out of the training needs analysis, we were able to identify a couple of really key areas for focus. And to address those needs, my team has developed a series of really simple job aids on our process. And in particular, one thing that we picked up, which was really interesting, was in certain situations, some of our team members did not perceive the disclosure of DFSV, which was really interesting. Because not all customers say it in a really explicit way. There were some examples in the scenario-based quiz where groups of agents just didn't pick up on the cues and they went to a different process rather than the DFSV process that we have. And so on top of developing some job aids to explain the process, we've also developed another job aid which talks about some of the really overt words customers use when disclosing that they're in a DFSV situation, and also some of the more subtle cues. And so we're hoping that the combination of a support resource about the cues and the disclosures and a support resource about process and policy, I'm hoping will address some of the fire that was between that we identified between March and July. And to really make that sing, we're developing a 45-minute facilitated session, which will principally go out to our offshore contact centers, but we'll probably reuse elements of it onshore, which is about how to use these job aids and make the most of the knowledge that we're trying to sort of plug in for these little gaps. So that's kind of one level. And I kind of just see that as dealing with business issues today, knowledge gaps, process gaps, the ability for our teams to feel confident in working with victim survivors as they come through to us. But underneath that, there's actually a different game I'm playing, which is the long game of developing a really comprehensive, developing sort of a soft skills program and an e-learning program to actually achieve and exceed the new DFSV standard. And so, of course, the standard is asking us to partner with an external agency for consulting and advice on this, which is fabulous because, internally, we just don't have the expertise, I think, to do an absolutely crack job of this. And so between sort of March and July, I began to do a series of consults. So reached out to lots of different organizations. A number of them came back to us. We ended up having a number of really productive meetings with several different agencies and talked a bit about what we wanted to achieve as a business. And we've only just recently now selected our agency. I haven't sort of got the ink on the contract yet, so I'm a little bit shy of sort of revealing who that is. But we're pretty close to sort of getting that sorted, and we'll be kicking off the development of our learning and development solution for the longer term, meeting the standard. So we'll probably kick that off in October, and it's going to be a co-design process where we'll use their expertise, their advice, some of their intellectual property, and I'll use my team of designers and facilitators to co-design the training to suit our business and our employees in all their different forms. And that includes some really interesting concepts like cultural lensing for offshore contact centers, which is a bit of a new dimension. So we have a big contact center in Manila and a big contact center in India. And something that the agency that we've partnered with is they have some experience in re-lensing how training is delivered there, so it's just as effective, because the way in which these kind of offshore areas perceive and think and address domestic and family sexual violence is a little bit different than the way in which we talk about it here in Australia. So that's going to be something really interesting for us to have a look at. And then I'm kind of anticipating that our rollout will sort of begin coming back after Christmas. So we'll have enough time to develop the training this year, and then we'll roll out the training January, February, March, and we should be complete by the 1st of April. And then from there, one of the really important aspects and a part of our brief when interviewing agencies is we wanted to be really self-sufficient. So we needed to be able to run the training ourselves, because as we onboard new team, part of the standard says they need to have completed the training before they talk to a customer. So we need to be able to run that almost constantly. And we also need the ability to sort of be able to edit any e-learns on an ads needs basis. And all of this is sitting on our learning management system for robust reporting and monitoring, which my friends from Risk and Audit should really like. And so this is the sort of longer term plan, and it sort of sits underneath. And so right now I'm sort of co-managing these two bodies of work and trying to keep them cohesive, trying to stop the energy and enthusiasm of all the different parts of our business to run out and develop their own solutions and their own training and their own policies and their own processes. It's actually comes to the next part that I kind of wanted to talk to you a little bit about. And that is this thing I've sort of become more and more aware of as I've worked through this project, and that is good intent. And I've sort of found myself talking a lot about this, where I think everybody, when they bring their intelligence and passion and energy to this topic, there's so much good intent. Everybody wants to do the right thing by victim survivors. And I think that means that everybody is willing to get involved, to give it 110%, work together, sometimes break things, try new things, all in an effort to be sure that we're here not to make our customers' lives harder in moments when they really need us to make things easy for them. And I think good intent is both the strength of what we're doing, but it is also a challenge. And it sort of comes back to what I was talking about a bit earlier, which is there is so much good intent that people will, or different parts of the business, have so much drive to create solutions and to solve problems, is that they all kind of scatter in different directions. And so there's been a couple of occasions working through this project where we've come across different parts of our business. They've developed their own training and they were just getting ready to roll that training out when we've found out, we've had to go, whoa, slow up a little bit there. Love the good intent, but we kind of need to keep this cohesive. We need to ensure that what we're delivering from a learning and development perspective is all coming from the same place. And that's kind of why I think good intent is a bit of a double-edged sword. It drives people, creates enthusiasm, and the objective is good customer outcomes, but the difficulty of good intent is that it can also create a lack of cohesion as everybody rushes out to try and solve the problem. And so that's a little bit of a story to let you kind of get a bit of insight into what we're doing, what I'm doing, what we're doing in an effort to kind of address day-to-day business problems through a lot of short-term, sort of, for want of a better word, tactical solutions. I don't like that. It's very clinical, but that's kind of the words that we use, while also working towards a more robust, a more informed, and I think a better solution of soft skill development and knowledge development that will set us up for the future, and not only meeting the standard, but exceeding the standard. And this is just a bit of a screenshot to show you some of the things that we've developed. The top line is the scenario-based quiz, the TNA. The center line is the work that we put into the new TCP course, which we've titled Supporting Customers Experiencing Vulnerability, which is really at its heart. It's not a clinical sort of TCP code learning. And then at the bottom there, you can see some of the draft job aids that we're working on that will support the short-term training rollout that we have happening. And that's come out of my design team, who are really jumped at this opportunity with gusto. And that sort of concludes my talk. So thank you very much for your time. I hope you got something useful out of that, and look forward to the Q&A at the end.
Bev, thank you so much for that presentation. I thought that was really insightful, and you touched upon so many things that I'd like to go into in a little bit more with the panel in a sec as well, like the things like the soft skills, which I can imagine be a very different type of skill than you potentially had to focus on in other areas that you roll out from training perspective. Before we bring the next panel on, I'll launch another poll. And that is try to get an understand for all of you who've joined us today to see what you see at your organization as the biggest barriers to progressing training in your organization. Is it a lack of leadership support? Are the requirements of the standard still unclear? Is it hard to know where to start? Are there too many competing priorities? Lack of budget, restraints, resources, or are you actually feeling that you're fully on track? So whilst you submit this, if you haven't answered the previous poll, you can still do so. They are available under the polls button on the top right on your screen. It'd be really interesting to see where your organization is at. So as those are coming on, I'd like to invite all our panelists to switch their cameras on and join us. So we'll get Beth back again to join the panel. And we also have Mia Ristovska, who's Quality and Training Manager from DV Connect, and Hayley Williamson from Safe and Equals and as Lived Experience Manager. As I mentioned, the bios are in the Q&A, and we're really pleased to have the three of you joining us for the panel today. Looking at the polls, so to see where we can focus on, it's really a great split. So other than lack of leadership, it's pretty much equal between not knowing where to start and competing priorities or low staff engagement. So those are things that we can definitely touch upon during the rest of the panel. If you do have questions, please put them in the Q&A and I will make sure that we can address them today with the panel or either follow up afterwards. So Mia, maybe we start with you and give a little bit of brief introduction about DV Connect and your role, as well as your experience with the training standard.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure and an honour to be here. Thank you for inviting me. So as Saskia mentioned, I'm Mia Ristovska. I'm the Quality Training Manager here at DV Connect and coming to you today from the lands of the Yagara and Turrbal people. So DV Connect is an organisation that works specifically with people who have experienced and also people who have used domestic, family and sexual violence. We are a Queensland-based organisation that's been around for around 40 years and the main parts of the business are crisis telephone services, so virtual services that respond to people who are at crisis point with domestic, family and sexual violence. But we also offer virtual services for people who are using violence as well, and sometimes the two intersect. I've been at DV Connect for around 5.5 years now, and I'm the Quality and Training Manager. And in that role, we do a lot of external training and a lot of consultation with organisations that are wanting to become more informed in their domestic, family and sexual violence understanding, but also how they can relate to a lot of their customers, a lot of their clients and a lot of their stakeholders, and even their peers who may be experiencing or using that type of violence and abuse. So like my bio says, I'm an accredited family violence social worker. I've been a social worker for around about 16 years now. And I've worked here and in the United States of America in a state called Utah, a beautiful city called Salt Lake City. Did that for 5 years and working in, the domestic, family and sexual violence space for most of that time. As a lot of you may have found, and as Bevan said, there's a lot to this space and a lot of people have great intentions. And I'm really heartened actually to see the responses that are coming through on the polls so far. But that's me.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mia, for that introduction. And Hayley, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your background and your experience at Safe and Equal.
Thanks, Saskia. Hello, everyone. My name is Hayley and my pronouns are she, her. I am coming to you from Wurundjeri country in Victoria. Also a pleasure to be here. So I work at Safe and Equal in the role of Lived Experience and Workplace Partnerships Manager. So they're two separate but interconnected teams. And before I go through what those two teams specialise in, I'll briefly explain who Safe and Equal are, as our team kind of sit adjacent to that a little bit. So Safe and Equal is the peak body for organisations working in family and gender-based violence in Victoria. And those organisations work across what we call the continuum of family and gender-based violence. So those organisations are members of Safe and Equal, and we advocate on their behalf and work with them on the priorities of the sector. And so by the continuum, we mean organisations working in primary prevention, so how we stop this violence before it starts, right through to early intervention, so how we can intervene when we're noticing signs of violence, through to response and recovery. And response and recovery are where we're looking at those frontline family violence services that are assisting victim survivors in crisis. So the team that I have the pleasure of leading does sit adjacent to that traditional function of the peak as a social enterprise model. So the lived experience team is a group of 12 survivor advocates that are employed by Safe and Equal to help inform the work of both the peak and organisations in sectors external to the family violence sector. And the work of this of these two teams is nationwide. And that's where it interconnects with the workplace partnerships team. And our responsibility is to translate the expertise of the family violence sector into sectors outside our own, such as yours, so that we can try and make it as easily accessible as possible, but also take away the pressure for those sectors to try and grapple with this huge social problem. And so generally when we come together, we bring the expertise of the family violence sector and you bring the expertise of your sector, and that's where we can help create change. And so we do that through consultations, so consulting on policy and process and ways of working, and being able to deep dive into that if capacity allows, to kind of understand what your staff capability levels are and make some recommendations, as well as some off-the-shelf training and customised training, including things, e-learns and things like responding to disclosures for both customer-facing teams and for employees. So that's me.
Thanks, Hayley. And it's really interesting to hear how the two teams work together and a really strong focus on the victim survivors. Mia, when we were prepping before this session, I think you mentioned this here as well. I think one of the really interesting aspects of your organization is that you also work with perpetrators. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that? Because we often talk about victim survivors, which is obviously absolutely essential, but perpetrators really play a key role in addressing the problem as well. Could be keen to learn a little bit more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So through the organisation, we run a couple of services that are there for people who are using violence. So we run a helpline for people who are using violence at that point where they feel they need to talk to someone about some concerns that they have about their behaviour and the way that they're expressing their behaviour. We have a couple of other programs as well. But what we also do is we assist in upskilling and working with organisations in how do we work with people who use violence? Because we have a whole lot of people who are survivors of domestic and family violence, and we're more and more able to identify what someone who's experiencing domestic and family violence looks like, even if they don't outwardly disclose that they're experiencing violence. But if we're working with people who are experiencing violence, it's going to make sense that we're also working with people who are using violence. And the beautiful work that is being done to support victim survivors needs to be complemented by the work to address the cause of domestic, family and sexual violence as well. So rather than looking at it as a band-aid solution, we want to work with victim survivors because, you know, they're the people most in need of protection and support. In order to really look at eradicating domestic, family and sexual violence, we need to be working with all parties across that spectrum, that continuum that Hayley referred to there as well. So a lot of questions that we get asked is, you know, how would I tell that someone is using violence? What do I say if I think that someone might be someone using violence? Or also, you know, this person has told me that their partner is using violence against them. I have to have a conversation with this partner that's using violence. What do I say? Do I bring it up? Do I avoid the conversation? How do I protect the privacy and security of that person who's experiencing violence? And also, what support is there available for that person who's using violence? Where do I refer them to? Who do I connect them with? So these are conversations that can sometimes be really uncomfortable to bring up because nobody wants to talk about the use of violence and someone's use of violence. But if we're going to seriously address it at every level across society, then they're conversations that we need to have.
That's really interesting. And I think that relates a lot to what both Hayley and Bev said earlier as well, right? Like I think where this training that's being rolled out is very different is that there's such a focus on soft skills and understanding words and interpreting situations, which potentially also might make it one of the more tricky trainings to roll out because there's not a clear-cut answer. So maybe Bev, how in your experience is it different in terms of the soft skills that you're trying to roll out, and how are you measuring success of that? Because if you look at the scenarios that you make people or that you worked on in the beginning, the 7 scenarios for the teams and the responses to that, did you see very greatly different answers among staff in terms of how they answered it?
Yeah, it was interesting when you looked at the data and sort of tried to take a kind of a data view of it. So the very first scenario, almost everybody flunked it in one way or another, because they knew the scenario was going to be about domestic and family violence. But in a lot of cases, the scenarios aren't black and white. And then the choices you make on how what's your first step are not always super prescribed. And it actually, you see an improvement in the quality scores as you go through, as they begin to register, this is kind of what you're asking of me to do, so I get better and better and better at selecting the right response. And what was interesting is, even though it was a TNA, people learnt as they were doing it. And so a lot of the parts of our business said, Bev, can you just leave it on, because we're actually using it as training on top of just helping us understand what our problems are. And that sort of helps inform some of it. I think you sort of have to do a little bit of reading into the data as well. But there were some very clear demarcations between our Indian-based contact center and our Manila-based contact center and our onshore contact center. Also in the way in which they were selecting the correct response. And I do try to build my responses as clearly the correct answer, clearly the incorrect answer, but then one in the middle that kind of feels like it could be correct, but it is incorrect. And in some cases, for certain scenarios, even when shown the correct answer, there was a large proportion who was selecting either the incorrect answer or the partly incorrect answer. And so when people selected the plainly incorrect answer, we interpreted that as they didn't perceive the scenario as this is a DFV scenario, therefore I go straight to my DFV policy or process. And then those that selected the kind of half right, half wrong clearly saw it as a scenario with a victim survivor, but they got their process wrong. So that's kind of why we think the two areas of improvement for us were just the lingo, because, you know, disclosure isn't black and white either. Like, people will abbreviate. Some will say AVO, some will say apprehended violence order, some will say protection order, you know, some will simply say the court order. And I think because there's so much terminology in there, not everyone's familiar with the vernacular. So we're just trying to lower the barrier of the vernacular. And in the very, very short term, we would love if there was 100% policy adherence for clearly disclosed situations. So if a customer clearly discloses that they are a victim survivor in a moment of crisis, we have 100% adherence that the team member serving them goes to the DFV process and follows it correctly. We think actually that would be a really good achievement, because you have to sort of consider that for those cases where we don't, that's a failing of supporting someone in a moment of crisis. We're kind of making it, in a few examples, we're making things harder, not easier on them. So I think that would be an achievement. The soft skills aspect of it is going to be an interesting one, because it's going to mean different things to different parts of our business. And even just, there's some simple things, and I was talking about this with our head of wellbeing. I would just love it if it was as simple as, the moment I hear a disclosure, the first thing I ask is it safe for you to have this conversation with me right now? It's really simple. And that is a demonstration of understanding and empathy that is not always translated well. People can be very process driven. I hear this, I then go to my policy, I follow the boxes. So we think that we're going to sort of partly re-engineer some of the processes, sort of say, stop. The minute I hear a disclosure, think about the situation, check that your customer is in the safe space to continue the conversation, and then move into your policy and process. And so I think adherence to that as well, I think, will come through. We're also trying to simplify it so that there's not as many middle arbiters. We can connect our customers directly with our specialist team, which is based in Hobart, our Hobart contact centre. So their job is that they're not bound by business policy or procedure. They're there to create an absolute bespoke solution to support that customer in that moment of need, whereas most of our other parts of the business are kind of regimented by policy and process. So we want to simplify it to say the minute I suspect or a customer discloses, my job is to get them straight to that team. And again, if we can get sort of high adherence to that, we see that as a win. And we're not aggravating the situation. We're not asking people to re-experience trauma by having to explain it 3 times to 3 different people. You know, I think those are some really key goals that, and if we can achieve that, I think we're well on our way to having a really good social impact and making our customers' lives easier.
Thanks, Bev. I think you really highlighted like a really important part in that last bit, whereby you're really trying to think about the victim survivors not having to repeat the story and keeping them central in the outcome of the training. Hayley, how are you trying to keep your victim survivors central in the programs that you design? And if you've got a team of 12 at the moment, when we talk about some of the scenarios that Bev mentioned earlier, is there consistency when you put the training together, that everybody feels that that is the right way to go? Or do you have kind of the conversations about there might be different options and you need your soft skills to interpret the situation?
Yeah, good question. I think like every experience of family violence is different. Absolutely. There's no kind of one way that someone experiences violence. And I think that, you know, we need to ensure that we're understanding the definition of what family violence means, which is a lot broader than intimate partner violence, which a lot of us are traditionally taught to understand to be the main identifier. The definition is much broader and includes a lot of different types of relationships. So there's that layer as well as all of the different types of abuse. So I think there's certainly can be consistency in some of those foundational principles that help keep both customers and your teams safe, for sure. And those foundational principles will then help to get the customer with their consent always to that specialised team. And that's where those soft skills are absolutely invaluable and necessary. So I think when we talk about the sources of lived experience that we engage, we kind of often talk about 3 interlinking areas of lived experience. There's the lived experience of the family violence workforce, which is the kind of the practice expertise or the leadership expertise in the sector, from research and being in practice. And then there's the lived experience of clients who are utilising the services, and there's the lived experience of survivor advocates. The team that I lead at these 2 circles, the workforce and survivor advocates. And so by bringing that lived experience into the design of your training and into the delivery of your training, allows for the understanding of nuance and those differences, as you put it, Saskia, in terms of being able to understand all of the different ways that someone can perpetrate abuse, so that your customer service teams are able to notice some of those nuances. If we're able to kind of tier that training to those soft skills so that your specialist teams are able to understand more of those nuances, then they're probably going to have a better chance of responding to those unique circumstances each time. And the final thing I'll say is that people using violence are always evolving their ways to weaponize products and services. So by ensuring that lived expertise is at the forefront of how you're working and engaging with the specialist sector, you're going to be able to keep on top of, well, 6 months has gone by and actually we've noticed that people using violence are now using this kind of loophole to weaponize our product or service. Yeah.
Thanks, Hayley. I think you touched upon a couple of things that are really key to deliver a good training. So Mia, maybe the flip side of that question, what are some of the pitfalls or some of the challenges that you've seen when you're trying to roll out training? So we've got, as you saw in the poll, some organizations that are quite new to this. What are some of the lessons that you've learned that can really help people avoid some of those challenges initially?
Absolutely. I think Bevan made a really good point earlier that a lot of people come in with really great intention and great intent and get very, very excited and want to upskill their team in so many of the areas in the whole area. So, Hayley's group and my group probably have a similar sort of approach in that we have some packages available for training. And when people come and ask us, I want my whole team upskilled in your gold standard training package, we really need to consider the impact of that as well and whether that sort of training is really for everyone at every level of the organisation. One thing that we want to do is we want to see their level of engagement with the client. What sort of engagement are they having with the client, and tailor the training and tailor the sort of level and intensity of training based on that as well. So for someone who's a frontline worker, we may not, we wouldn't give them the same level of training as someone who's in a customer support team. Or some places do have specialised teams that work with people who are experiencing trauma, hardship, including domestic and family violence. We'd want to provide them with more of those, with more details, with more information, with more practical application of a lot of the skills and theory that we're going to be doing in the training, more so than someone who's on the front line. One thing we noticed as well is that a lot of people within organisations, there is a lot of lived experience in companies and organisations, and the well-being of staff is something that is really, really crucial. So we really do want to make sure that staff are aware of what they're going to be trained in and any considerations that need to be put in place before staff do the training. We do know that for a lot of people, even if the abuse that they experienced was a significant period of time ago, there can be triggers that are done in the training. We can make, let's say it's an e-learning module, you can make an e-learning module as plain and relatively benign as possible, but there may still be something, a word, a scenario that triggers a team member who's had lived experience. So making sure that there is that follow-up support for them, whether it's through, putting the details of EAP or a counselling support line on there to make sure that they know to be supported in that space is crucial. And another part as well that we see a lot of the time is knowing what the appetite and the timeliness of the training is. So for a lot of people, the attention span can be quite low, and they might be thinking, do I really need all of this training at once? So making the training for some people bite-sized. Even if we give them that little bit of information, that's better if they're able to retain that for the role as well. That staff wellbeing piece is exceptionally crucial. A lot of staff as well might find that when they're doing the training, it may bring up things for them at this point in time. We've had examples where we've done training for organisations, and they've come back to us and said, we had a team member that went through the training, and then while they were doing the training, came to the realisation that what they were experiencing in their relationship was actually violence, and that they needed support in that. So making sure that those team leaders, supervisors, support teams that these employees will go to are upskilled enough to know where to refer their team members to. That's very, very important.
Thanks, Mia. And that actually set me up really well for the question that Jackie posed in the queue. And this one is for you, Bev. How about, are you tiering your staff? Do you have a level 1 for all staff, level 2 for customer facing, level 3 for dedicated team? And if so, what modalities are you using for who, and when are you delivering each stage?
Yep, that's a good question.
And if you can keep it relatively brief, because we've got about 6 minutes left.
No, that's okay. So we are sort of almost approaching it in that way. So we have a all company awareness, which is kind of what I managed to sneak into our TCP course. So we have a section on DFE that explains the concepts, some of the intersectionality with things like financial hardship, and we're using that to sort of create a very basic foundational layer understanding all the way across the company, corporate and frontline. The second round that we're building as a part of the solution with our provider will be, right now it's looking like there'll be 2 e-learning pieces that will go out to all frontline. And then there will also be soft skills training for all frontline, but then specialist soft skills training just for our specialist team down in Hobart. And each one will be sort of slightly tailored. As I said, particularly for our offshore contact centers, they'll be culturally lensed to the country in which they're delivered. But it's going to be a big job. And a lot of this will be running concurrently. People will be doing the e-learns and the soft skills sort of concurrently. And we anticipate the rollout will take us the better part of 3 months to get everybody through all those tiers.
Yeah, it's certainly in an organization your size, it's I can imagine it being a massive undertaking. So as we're about to wrap up the session, I'd like to ask each of you one final question, and that's taking into account 2 of the challenges that the attendees have identified, which is I don't know where to start and competing priorities internally. So Hayley and Mia, if I can ask you to come up with one recommendation or one suggestion of something that people need to take into consideration when thinking about starting the training. And then Bevan, if you can give one recommendation of how to deal with competing priorities. So Hayley, if we could start with you, please.
Oh, it's so hard to choose one. I think when starting with the training, I suppose, it can be overwhelming. Analysis paralysis is real. I think take it step by step. Just start would be my takeaway, because the sooner you can get started, it won't be as rushed. And when we are rushing this, we've seen organisations rush to deliver, to adhere to legislation, and we create more damage for your staff and kind of more vicarious trauma when we're not planning in advance. So please consult with the sector. We're here to support you, to make it safer and to help your teams. So that would be my number one. I've got about 20 million more. So over to you, Mia.
Thank you. I would echo the same thing. Consult with anybody in the sector. I think this is something that, the sector is really passionate about as well, because we talk about domestic, family and sexual violence every day. This is our bread and butter in working with people who are experiencing violence and working people who are using violence. There's a lot of wealth and knowledge there as well. And the other one would be to go and talk to another organisation or someone in an organisation that has rolled out training like this before. So someone like Bevan, getting updated from them on how did it work? How did you start? What did you do to get the ball rolling and to, convince people around you that this was important and worthwhile? Yeah, over to you, Bevan.
Thank you. In terms of competing priorities, I kind of see it in 2 different ways. The first is the slightly more altruistic way, and I think most companies of any size will have a series of company values. And typically having the customer at the center of your values or your ambition as a company is typically one of them. And so what we do in order to help it sit in the right priority stack is we snuggle this work in with our company values. So the activity that you're generating ladders straight into your company values. And I think that's kind of a good narrative way of helping cut through a little bit of the noise. The other side is the warning side, which is ultimately, I think all businesses have competing priorities, but I think regulators don't really see that. They look for adherence. And I think the other narrative for companies that are struggling with priority is that the regulator expects adherence. And so you'd much rather take the altruistic route and drive your activity based out of your company values than kind of learn the hard way that not achieving the standard ends up getting us in trouble with the regulators and doesn't result in good customer outcomes. So it's a doubly bad conclusion.
That's a great suggestion to link it to the values. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
So with that, we're nearly at the end of the session. I think a couple of key themes that came through for me is the focus on the staff well-being as you're rolling these trainings out, as it might trigger sensitivity in challenging situation. The double-edged sword of the good intent, creating disconnect and potentially unintended consequences. A focus on soft skills and cultural sensitivities and cultural lenses is really important when you start rolling out training, as well as the co-design. And I think the overall message is to start planning and connect with the industry. There's plenty of organizations and bodies who can help you on your journey. As follow-up, we will be sending out the recording as well as the contact details and the presentation from today. If you have any questions or like to know more about the DFV action framework from Telco Together, please feel free to reach out to Bev or myself. We're more than happy to connect and help you on your journey, as well as talk you through to the resources that the Telco Together Foundation has put together already in this space. And with that, exactly on the dot, I'd really like to send a heartfelt thank you to our speakers today for joining this session. We really appreciate your time and sharing your insight and your knowledge. Thank you everyone for attending today and hope to see you soon again. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.